Notes on Democracy by H.L. Mencken. Chapter 1. Democratic Man: His Appearance in the World. Democracy came into the Western world with the tune of sweet, soft music. There was, at the start, no harsh bawling from below. There was only a dulcet twittering from above. Democratic man thus began as an ideal being, full of ineffable virtues and romantic wrongs. In brief, as Rousseau's noble savage, in smock and jerkin, brought out of the tropical wilds to shame the lords and masters of the civilized lands. The fact continues to have important consequences to this day. It remains impossible, as it was in the 18th century, to separate the democratic idea from the theory that there is a mystical merit, an esoteric and ineradicable rectitude in the man at the bottom of the scale, that inferiority, by some strange magic, becomes a sort of superiority, nay, the superiority of superiorities. Everywhere on earth, save where the enlightenment of the modern age is confessedly in transient eclipse, the movement is toward the completer and more enamored enfranchisement of the lower orders. Down there, one hears, lies a deep, illimitable reservoir of righteousness and wisdom, unpolluted by the corruption of privilege. What baffles statesmen is to be solved by the people, instantly and by a sort of seraphic intuition. Their yearnings are pure. They alone are capable of a perfect patriotism. In them is the only hope of peace and happiness on this lugubrious ball. The cure for the evils of democracy is more democracy. This notion, as I hint, originated in the poetic fancy of gentlemen on the upper levels, sentimentalists who, observing to their distress that their ass was overladen, proposed to reform transport by putting him into the cart. A stale Christian bilge ran through their veins, though many of them, as it happened, toyed with what is now called modernism. They were the direct ancestors of the more saccharine liberals of today, who yet mouth their tattered phrases and dream their preposterous dreams. I can find no record that these phrases, in the beginning, made much impression upon the actual objects of their rhetoric. Early democratic man seems to have given little thought to the democratic ideal and less veneration. What he wanted was something concrete and highly materialistic. More to eat, less work, higher wages, lower taxes. He had no apparent belief in the achromatic virtue of his own class, and certainly none in its capacity to rule. His aim was not to exterminate the baron, but simply to bring the baron back to a proper discharge of baronial business. When, by the wild shooting that naturally accompanies all mob movements, the former end was accidentally accomplished, and men out of the mob began to take on baronial airs, the mob itself quickly showed its opinion of them by butchering them deliberately and in earnest. Once the pikes were out, indeed, it was a great deal more dangerous to be a tribune of the people than to be an ornament of the old order. The more copiously the blood gushed, the nearer that old order came to resurrection. The Paris proletariat, having been misled into killing its king in 1793, devoted the next 2 years to killing those who had misled it. And by the middle of 1796, it had another king in fact, and in 3 years more, he was king de jure, with an attendant herd of barons, counts, marquises, and dukes, some of them new, but most of them old, to guard, symbolize, and execute his sovereignty. And he and they were immensely popular, so popular that half France leaped to suicide that their glory might blind the world. Meanwhile, of course, there had been a certain seeping down of democratic theory from the metaphysicians to the mob, obscured by the uproar but still going on. Rhetoric, like a stealthy plague, was doing its immemorial work. where men were confronted by the harsh, exigent realities of battle and pillage, as they were everywhere on the continent, it got into their veins only slowly, but where they had time to listen to oratory, as in England, and above all in America, it fetched them more quickly. Eventually, as the world grew exhausted and the wars passed, it began to make its effects felt everywhere. Democratic man, contemplating himself, was suddenly warmed by the spectacle. His condition had plainly improved. Once a slave, he was now only a serf. Once condemned to silence, he was now free to criticize his masters and even to flout them and the ordinances of God with them. As he gained skill and fluency at that somber and fascinating art, he began to heave in wonder at his own merit. He was not only, it appeared, free to praise and damn, challenge and remonstrate, he was also gifted with a peculiar rectitude of thought and will, and a high talent for ideas, particularly on the political plane. So his wishes, in his mind, began to take on the dignity of legal rights, and after a while of intrinsic and natural rights, and by the same token, the wishes of his masters sank to the level of mere ignominious lusts. By 1828, in America, and by 1848, in Europe, the doctrine had arisen that all moral excellence, and with it all pure and unfettered sagacity, resided in the inferior four-fifths of mankind. In 1867, a philosopher out of the gutter pushed that doctrine to its logical conclusion. He taught that the superior minority had no virtues at all, and hence no rights at all, that the world belonged exclusively and absolutely to those who hewed its wood and drew its water. In less than half a century, he had more followers in the world, open and covert, than any other sophist since the age of the apostles. Since then, to be sure, there has been a considerable recession from that extreme position. The dictatorship of the proletariat, tried here and there, has turned out to be, if I may venture a prejudiced judgment, somewhat impracticable. Even the most advanced liberals, observing the thing in being, have been moved to cough sadly behind their hands. But it would certainly be going beyond the facts to say that the underlying democratic dogma has been abandoned or even appreciably overhauled. To the contrary, it is now more prosperous than ever before. The late war was fought in its name, and it was embraced with loud hosannas by all the defeated nations. Everywhere in Christendom, it is now official, save in a few benighted lands where God is temporarily asleep. Everywhere its fundamental axioms are accepted. A, that the great masses of men have an inalienable right, born of the very nature of things, to govern themselves, and B, that they are competent to do it. Are they occasionally detected in gross and lamentable imbecilities? Then it is only because they are misinformed by those who would exploit them. The remedy is more education. Are they at times seen to be a trifle naughty, even swinish? Then it is only natural reaction against the oppressions they suffer. The remedy is to deliver them. The central aim of all the Christian governments of today, in theory if not in fact, is to further their liberation, to augment their power, to drive ever larger and larger pipes into the great reservoir of their natural wisdom. That government is called good, which responds most quickly and accurately to their desires and ideas. That is called bad, which conditions their omnipotence and puts a question mark after their omniscience.